This is no longer invisible.
You've co-opted this.
Did you get it? I did not get it.
There's a little like delay function. So the order is just T.
Whenever you're ready. I'm going to assume there's a long overdue.
There's another long overdue. Yeah. You good to go? All right. Our interpretation is that the affirmative must defend that the United States federal government should substantially increase economic engagement in Cuba, Venezuela, or Mexico. We have two net benefits to our interpretation. First is ground. We choose a topic and force people, as some people to be affirmative sometimes and some people to be negative sometimes, because that is a fair division of affirmative and negative ground, at least in the sense that everyone has to be half and negative the same number of times. They can simply pick whatever side of the topic they want to talk about 100% of the time, or pick whatever they want to talk about 100%, and they can always find the part of the debate where the ground is biased in their direction, or where they have all the time to research, which is unfair for the other team. Our weird evidence says you have to be prepared to defend both sides of the topic in order to have a real understanding of the issue and to prove your moral tolerance, which means picking a particular side of the topic all the time allows you to avoid a particular side of that discussion or not engaging in it. Second is predictability. There are a bunch of different ways you can approach confronting the ethical wrongings of the resolution, even if they have something to do with economic engagement. These ways are fundamentally unpredictable and don't give the negative standard mechanism with which we can engage your arguments. For example, you could get up in the 1T and say the existing form of economic engagement is messed up because it's patriarchal, or you could talk about how that the particular system has been entrenched with religious tension or something like that. There's not a standard mechanism for the negative to get up and be like, well, you're right, like economic engagement is kind of messed up. I thought that's what we were going to say, but I don't know. But the point is that there's no predictable basis for negative ground that we would always be able to have in these particular debates. We may be able to come up with something on the fly or dig through our back files or something, but it doesn't mean we have an in-depth research strategy for those particular types of affirmatives. Now, there are a couple impacts to that particular claim. First, since competitive equity debate is still a game at some fundamental level, and the negative needs at least some sort of avenue to engage the debate. We're not asking for much more than that. Plus, your app is not meaningful without fairness. It's hard into the structure of economic debate as a concept and underwrite the political principles of not only need other to my ownership, but instead of sending victim demands, enable opponent defending and incapable of better winds up being meaningless. Others have opportunities and capacity to be involved in content and competition. They include active reason for helping people with political concepts become more able participants. There's a distinction between in-round and out-of-round fairness. Some conditions outside the debate round don't merit retribution within the round. Now, the second argument is Zappin evidence indicates you cannot make any truth claim that's a prerequisite to dividing the 1C in and of itself, because the truth claim only comes about via consultation between people and making sure your knowledge is not just an artificial product of your own description of the world, that it's actually true in reference to other people. If you just presenting your idea, then someone hasn't had time to research it, think about it. You don't get a rigorous test of whether or not the ideas you're coming up with are good ones. Even if you're really right about something, you should still be subject to another interpretation in order to defeat that and advance your arguments in the future. Our tribally evidence also indicates that debates themselves become valueless if you can't agree on what it is you're supposed to be debating about. It just becomes 2 shades passing night, which means those debates never translate to valuable discussion. Now, their interpretation, funnily enough, is saying there's a link of omission on the topic. It says the topic or the way we approach it is bad because it assumes a discussion about Asian American identity. This interpretation is fundamentally arbitrary and amounts to me getting up in the 2 and just saying this topic assumes a state's counterpoint, which is keeping my value life because this topic sucks. So, even though no one would ever say that, but you should still reject their interpretation. Center Epstein evidence. Its answers are epistemology claims that they cross-apply to framework, and in the sense that you can't make these totalizing claims to judge whether or not people's knowledge is situated in a particular social context because we can't all experience the same things at the same time. So if it's true that I can only truly understand something I've been through it personally, then my scholarship is inherently suspect because I'm white in the way it's rooted in my particular understanding of history, etc. So if people have different personal experiences, different interpretations of history, they can never come together and discuss a common topic for debate, which means that those things might be important or worth discussing, but they're not things we should be debating about because it leads to unproductive conversations. When he gets up in the 2AC and says that you don't know who we are, you don't know Centennial KK, so we're going to tell you our story. That means we should try to find the objective standards, or at least the interest-objective standards, so we can agree upon what we're discussing about. Now, I don't think any of their arguments are offensive reasons why you should reject our interpretation. There's nothing about a framework that can't discuss history or the roots of economic engagement policy or biases against Asian Americans, why there's oppression. There's nothing inconsistent with that, but you simply have to connect it with a reason why it's good to increase some form of economic engagement by the USFT. It also makes a lot more sense in the context of debating the ass side of the topic than the neg, because you could say there are solutions within the existing situation, we should change them. You can connect it to a specific interpretation of history or a personal narrative like you do in the one you see, but we should at least be able to connect it to read a dissad or some other form of stable offense, like when they just critique the China dissad that we read in, and then they don't defend the USFG. Even if you have some sort of unpredictable advantage or something, we would at least have something to weigh against, or something in offense saying economic engagement is bad. It might just be some generic K, like the colonialism K or something. It'd be a heteronormativity type argument, it could be a dissad, but at least we have something that we can weigh against the affirmative. Now, their debate norms offense is good for us if it's good to disrupt debate norms in practice. You should vote negative, which counts the most fundamental debate assumption about competition and winning. Voting against the team that wins in a will would be the most effective way to demonstrate the argument. Now, I'm going to send the jurisdiction argument at the bottom. It's not necessarily offensive for good debate practice, but it's the reason why if they don't answer the economic engagement interpretation, their debates evolve from discussion over a topic to tangents that accidentally do not fall under your jurisdiction as Nietzsche, which means you should force them to generate that much more offense, because even if when a resolution is bad, it necessarily deviates from the only rule in debate besides time limits. Now, the vast majority of their offense applies to role playing. First, we don't defend that. It's not about policy. It's not about policy simulation, but scenario building. We are not policymakers, but you should still be able to predict the consequences of action and comparing the consequences of those of unexpected simulation. You only analyze low-end events that we learn about in debate while learning about the consequences of other actions, i.e. their role-playing scenarios that can be analyzed through traditional forms of analysis outside the realm, which means that our form of education is net better. Now, the intellectual policing argument. They say it's their interpretation is a prerequisite to political activism of Asians. However, debate is still a game under either frame or time limits. Competitive structure previous just a question of whether or not we make that debate game meaningful and constructive. And since it's a zero-sum game where one team loses, crushing our ability to focus on government policy robs our personal agency more. And two, no link voting negative doesn't mean you discount their personal opinions or deem them worthless. You can still agree with their message, but vote negative. It sets a precedent for bad debate norms. And three, no terminal impact if they choose to participate before reading the argument. Debate is oppressive. They can leave and let us decide whether we like it. Now, they can destroy future agency on a larger scale. If it's a solving policy debate, in fact, it's philosophical jargon, destroys political relevance, and sees the political to oppressive leads. It's the only evidence in the context of both competitive debate and this year's resolution. The next argument said they don't lead to the end of resolution. Our offense is not about preserving the integrity of the resolution or preserving it for future debate rounds. About whether or not we have a constructive dialogue within the debate space and can create change to that. The psychological violence argument was answered above. Our interpretation of the resolution can be incorporated through different social contexts, and it doesn't necessarily execute psychological violence on one particular social location, because you can use that social location in relation to how you relate to the debate topic. You just have to connect it to a particular source of stable ground where we can have a productive discussion about that. Use Koreans as a shield argument. I'm not sure how this applies to specifically to our interpretation of framework. And that probably applies just as much if it's about the discussions of the debate topic than it's to their interpretation. The myth of the model minority argument that is going to be answered in the one in our primarily on the case debate, but there's the distinction between in-round and out-of-round fairness was answered above, which means that even if they do have a potentially oppressive background or some sort of myth of model minority that describes them within the debate space, that should not be a valuable, that should not be a relevant consideration when deciding which team did the better debating and which team proved the resolution true or false. The performance leads to policy argument is not in the context of debate. It says that once you perform, you have some sort of understanding of how policy operates, not that you can operate in that more effectively as a person, which means that you should engage with the resolution. The promotion of Western knowledge argument, which comes next, is answered by absolutely short evidence above that says that you should not promote particular social values because we can never understand those. So instead of just saying we promote Western knowledge, talk about why that particular situation is flawed, and in relation to the debate topic, the next argument is that it's controlled by white supremacists. We read pieces of evidence saying that your evidence says that you are more effectively you are able to more effectively engage within those institutions and defeat them in the future if you are subject to our intervention, if you are subject to both sides of the topic. The immigrationist economic engagement argument that Dega is the best card on the topics, and Heritage Singer is a senior analyst that spoke exclusively about the limits of the debate topic and assumes so phrasing its economic engagement, not just economic engagement, which is in context of USFG, which means you should default to it. The resolve definition, we preempted this in the context of the resolution. Resolve is just an introductory clause used in legislative forms, not that they are resolved : about something. That's Army Officer School and Webster's in 98 to express an opinion about determination resolution about to declare decide something by formal followed by clause. And second, it's irrelevant. Our Erickson evidence says even if your desire spin on resolve, the subject of the resolution means it can only be resolved about specific policies, i.e. what the USFG should do. The colon is meaningless. Everything after is what is word in Webster and 2K. The integrated phrase between the colon is very brief. The clause and the colon represent the real business of the sentence. This doesn't get them anywhere. Their interpretation of resolution is still bad, even if it uses words from it. If we win our framework standards, we win. I don't think they meet their counter interpretation. I think we can concede this and win the debate because nothing about their framework precludes the discussion about the topic. Nothing about our framework precludes discussion about the topic. However, the permutation to make and the counter interpretation are fundamentally arbitrary and they don't meet it because they don't allow for a discussion about the USFG, which we have defined.
We don't allow a discussion of the USFG. Where does a discussion of the USFG for Asian Americans?
Okay, well, one, I think we could have had a discussion about the USFG in this debate round.
What's the policy plan that we could have done that talks about the myth of the model minority?
Right, so you could use the myth of the model minority to revise like trade or aid clauses. You could
trade and
like
aid
the
clauses.
data evidence we read.
Wait, trade and aid clauses to who?
Let's elaborate on that.
To like, you know, Korean immigrants.
To Korean immigrants in like the United States and Latin America, like.
In Latin America, yeah.
And like that breaks down the myth of the model minority.
Well, no, you could use that particular social understanding to inform your arguments, and then you would simply have to connect it to a way the USFG could incorporate that into policy.
All right, you say that discussing both sides of the topic is critical to be able to breaking down these forms of oppression. Am I correct?
So, sorry, what?
That being both sides of the topic is critical to breaking down this like oppression stuff.
Right, so the mere evidence says that you're able to more effectively engage with arguments because you have debated those arguments and you know the ins and outs.
All right, so the question here is, why is that F and neg? Why is it not USFG good and USFG bad?
Well, I'm not sure I understand the question.
Why does that preclude affirmative and negative? Why
well, right, so
us why doesn't us negating the resolution on the affirmative and you affirming the resolution on the negative solve for that?
Because when we come into a particular debate, like the USFG is kind of this stable thing where everyone has equal access to it. It's a non-subject.
If the USFG, the USFG is a bad thing, why do we want that as this stable thing?
Well, no, because it allows for a discussion where everyone has kind of
this is your own
no.
Dylan Hall, dude, I wish you read your Asian app so I could break my strat against it. Why aren't you not prepared to debate us?
What?
Why are you not prepared?
We should not be held responsible for what a teammate said.
Wait, we're not. I'm talking about couldn't you not research about the conscientization? We've been running this for several months now. What prevented you from engaging us?
Well, there's a difference between us coming into the debate with some sort of strategy about Asian kind of identity and us having some sort of stable mechanism for us to get up and be like,
I thought you said fairness was only good for engagement because then you guys are not prepared. If you are prepared, then why can't you engage us?
I'm not sure what you mean by us being not prepared and engaging.
What is your internal link to engagement then? Like how do
where does fairness okay, so the USFG, all of us have the ability to kind of contest what the USFG can do. However, when you devolve debate into competing social interpretations,
all of us can contest what the USFG.
Right. So when your advocacy statement becomes solely about social identity and where your background is, we don't have inroads to that particular type of knowledge because we've all experienced different things. Right. So the USFG is one kind of stable point where we all have an interpretation of that, where we can constructively engage in those types of debates instead of devolving to debates about social identity.
Why should we use that stable point?
Well, this kind of feeds into the topical version of the app argument, right? So even if it is bad, what? No, you can reform it. That's the point of the app.
Yeah. It's going to be the K, the counterpoint, and the case. Does everybody have it?
Yes.
Okay, awesome.
No.
Okay. Everyone's good now? Okay.
Critique and see the permutation just to test the computation. No ultimate advocate makes the app a moving target impossible to debate in the counterplan. Also can see the permutation. I'll enter the condo stuff here. It is good. First is our offense versus 2AC pressure, force efficiency, and skill development, which solves all of the impacts because they can reach your main offense to the right flow. And the alternative is lazy block repetition. Second is potential new apps. They're inevitable and require a response. Condo enables quick transformation when we like time to process, research, and test response. And finally is neck run. Our offense is reactionary, and so they're always more specific and familiar. This means you should give us some leeway. No defense, no time skew, speech times check, but speed and procedurals make it inevitable. The point of being neg is try skew, and if we actually double turn ourselves, it would help in our depth. It is inevitable. 2 in our checks and 2AC can exert influence over neg shifting, and our interpretation, 2 condo worlds, less than read your main offense, and counterplan and K to test the F. Now, also, conditional ethics isn't bad. They link their theory arguments and other response. Prove debates about speaker points and ballots, not ethical gestures. In turn, conditionality is more ethical than souls. And 3, considering different alternatives does not seem morally problematic, nor does it seem immoral. One might even defend such a course of ethically superior dogmatism, stands permitting either compromise or mortification based on it says to go to the case. The 1AC's discussion of resistance placed into the hands of conservative politics by tipping their hand the argument that we should protest is precisely the don't speak of endless temporal action through normative pronouncements about what should be done with the debate around itself merely functioning as a strategic means to an end, creating an ideology of resistance that posits a subject at a time that's never able to actualize agency at the local level. The only local space left is us at the imperceptible. Now turns the case for two reasons. Asa point, Hershock, evidence says this traits up with recognizing our interdependence and building autonomous communities outside of regulation, which means that the opportunity cost voting app is a type of politics to solve exclusion, infinitely better, doesn't care, that is excluded because of prefer autonomous bureaucratic existence to begin with. And B, when the success of the Affirmative project relies on reintegrating people into the system, the tag, which obviously they're not able to do if they're not using invisibility. Now, the interest conversions represented by the Ballot is temporary, best empirically. The implicit bargain that it grants empowerment in exchange for minority support, policy demands cannot last. The most resistant elements of movement will either be brought out or brutally suppressed, turning the case either way. That is Delgado. And 2, civil rights were a result of interest conversion. Cold War conservative force complaining that civil rights hurricane about also presiding inside the civil rights movement came to an end. The implicit bargain, the African immigrants church civil rights gains who expect to demonstrate loyalty, American hostility, communism, support farming examples. The Paul Robinson also explained the implicit understanding that blacks not support the government take action with the bargain, break down the government, respond in 2 ways where they crack down, and with brutal force, second ensure the minority leaders the note the government they institute the war on poverty program to listen many minority losing patronage, result black economic welfare surge, the second time the radical thrust of the civil rights movement was lost. And you should instead endorse imperceptible politics, which are immigrants crossing the border moving forward, solidarity in the transgression, and negate the law by denying its existence. The Affirmative admits to power, it congratulates subaltern struggle, it wants to be there upon the arrival of the immigrants, to congratulate them starting power, but just like how Occupy Wall Street was infiltrated by the CIA once it became visible, so the Affirmative revealed the flight of the oppressed they claim to be winning with congratulations. This is the case that sometimes with the FBI will always be there staking out the Black Panthers or any kind of movement ready to suppress the radical demands. A joyful affirmation of the president is prerequisite to imperceptible politics. Our critique begs the question of whether or not the 1AC should even have happened. As Cianos and 8, behind the Sacramento series is exalted an official concepts of social transformation. Traditional left we find harking back to youth acting and laughing rather succumbing to the bargaining fidelity, concerned about the new truth we enjoy, the ways in which the eruptive president escapes joyful not an intellectual argument to be advancing in order to rescue ubiquitous melancholy moral warning the left rather pointing at the embodiment of political practice which contest a dominant understanding of social change result as a responsive form of suffering. Now they also have exposed power and oppression to the debate space, to you the judge and to us the debaters, and in doing so they've commodified it, packaged into an 8-minute bundle of shades, a rhetoric artifact of the ballot. The 1AC has posed the question: how can we analyze deliberation? How can we talk about it? I have a different question. Why are radical politics best in a competitive form? Why is it saying it in a debate is good? The impact. Let's see this. They do not. They have no offensive reason for bringing forth this argument into the debate space. It's not the context of being judged by white folks in the classroom where there are no ballots for good intentions. They are not liberators. They claim to be. Rather, they are commodity traders on the floor of the New York Stock Exchange. The only difference is they have ideology to sell you stuff. Now, this turns the debate space into commodities markets for repression. This commodification. The 1AC reinscribes violent market practices. The 1AC criticizes. The impact is extinction. That's Baudrillard. And 10, the Promethean perspective on limited growth is the desire to make everything function, everything signify, everything brought together. The age meaning reality. Science makes a systemic effort to eradicate this mystery, all concealed by the revealed. Everything must be described in analysis. The whole ever leads to expansion of the field, meaning the accumulation of overproduction, proliferation, meaning constitutes virtual alternative planet, which congratulations to the domination and protects us from people who are in symbolic space, the concentration of mystery, market mystery. Now, the line below, they say there's no alternative. The alternative is just to vote negative. The status quo is the alternative because it is hidden in the status quo, which means we're able to resolve it only by not engaging in the political, not bringing this up in the first place. Are we able to allow for liberation and recognition of any problems to, like any minority groups? The non-uniqueness argument, yes, this may be true in the status quo, but that only proves the uniqueness that there is co-optation in the status quo. There is commodification only by not forming and not throwing ourselves at the government and only analyzing this individually at a subconscious and invisible level. We'll be able to overcome commoditization in the long term by not actually engaging in the system that makes it inevitable in the long term. And finally, they say that we don't know their position. That's exactly the point. Knowing their position gives the government and the system of oppression something to scapegoat, something to infiltrate and destroy. Only by remaining hidden are we able to actually analyze systems and analyze oppression and minority and solve backward in the long term without it being destroyed by the government as it empirically has.
Right.
Yeah.
5 something. I remember it was like 20-ish.
Yeah, 509.
Alright, case. Counter plan. Framework. Ready? Alright. The impact of the app was conceded once again. Myth of the monominor is a bad thing that oppresses Asian indiscussable. Prevents them from getting social services, prevents them from getting college education, prevents Asians from being Asian, oppressed from being visible. It turns Asian into collateral damage against other minors. It also justifies the black culture property and oppression against other minors. But people just point to Asian and say, look at those Asians, they're doing so well. Like, even in the conscious debate, people look at Centennial K and be like, oh, they're reading traditional affirmative that demand racial, which is that other traditional affirmatives need to stop doing on traditional time of debate and just follow Centennial KK. We haven't turned into these monominor, which is the reason why we're not defending traditional debate right now. In this constant state of flux, we're affirming a more inclusive form of debate that includes other types of views. The reason why we're the best to self-organize debate. The case arguments fundamentally don't make no sense. Commodification, not even inaccessible. These are about John a piece of China. I'm saying that Asian and commodified right now. Also, silence is not the answer. That's Dr. Crunch on 97. The construction miners are unable to academic plug with this with critical ideological necessity to make way into physical overturn silence. Scholars are locate interaction where the power line is supposed to explicit term line used. The basic intrinsic original argument because it was a joint public class arguments by race and publicness or two public actions discourse about race and how the personal master race center and class are entered in public argumentation. They don't have alternatives. Saying that vote negative means that you don't solve. No, it doesn't. It just means that the discussion race and which means that the one sees impact to this argument. All this mumbo jumbo crap in the reading of the Bulger card makes no sense. You cannot. What is commodification? Who gets commodified and who doesn't commodify? These are all questions not answered by the one and all, which is the reason why you should have a very high threshold for this argument. This is just based on performance bad. They don't have alternatives to make performance good, which means that all that answer the framework also answer this in cross application are vital. Not with the count, gotta count. You have misunderstood the condition of debate. I'm sure they said you cannot have contradiction, which you do in this debate because on the Nietzsche flow you say that suffering is bad. Except on the framework flow you say that except on the framework flow you just say that you know so that U.S. federal government action try to leave it suffering. And also you read this piece of pan evidence that we have dropped into one another. Pan evidence is a reason to independently vote against the negative because the pan evidence says that their portrayal of China as evil, lash out people are exceptionally to the Asian other. This feeds into the myth of the monominor, saying that China is evil. This is an independent racial epistemological index of the negative performance, which is the reason why the performance used to drop. His arguments about negative flexibility is logical whiteness because that's how white supremacy uses to contradict itself and then justify it again representation. So that his power still his arguments about the condition of being ethical do not assume contradictions, and also his argument about debate being about the ballot. It's not the affirmative because the affirmative having a stable advocacy. The framework argument has a framing issue. He did a very good job with the internal about deliberation, but he has no impact to what the heck deliberation relates to or whether or not debate should be good in the first place. All that arguments and epistemology index and a shot evidence about the current normal debate and the only traditional policy making is it impacts into all his arguments because either the current more deliberation, if you don't allow alternate side of debate, is gonna die off and be more racist and exclusionary, which is what's being proven in college debate right now. Now, limits are bad. The formal limits makes a positive engaged in discussion methodology, deliberative practice, forcing one team to define institution incompatible with their social location, results in disengaged apathy and lack of debates where two sides clash between methodology to deliberate press group and non-traditional debate, which is what's happening if one team is forced to let them stay every single day. Now, limits is the empire. It controls the type of education we get and fosters a sense of education. And this is proven very well. The lack of debaters willing to engage in non-traditional teams on questions on methodology. That is why Game and I stopped reading framework as a procedure. Instead, read this app about engagement. Now, I will finish this stolen Brian Boy in the 2AC. This emphasis on knowledge control and the colonization mind, which quickly appeals to circular center in the kernel debate. This is achieved through positive regular type of education. Students supposed to pedagogical regularly reflect ideals of power. People become convinced that this is the way it's always been. And also, the basic recognize the pluralistic nature of the community or debate becomes extinct. Value is starting in 90. The globalization of culture more diverse. The family common of everything different laws calling the community. The inability to move beyond states to the equation stagnation came into well. Within this foreign culture creating and comparison will continue to adapt to violence. Their interaction with ever-changing environment risk is issue. We must recognize the natural education game where we expose that to the 7. And this can be a common exposure to gears to inform about other cultures. The limelight, he says predictability. He said we have predictability. First time, and also there's no one ever truly proven. Disclosure is solving solvents. And comparative education arguments are not the better form of competition is one that compares methodology, which is the reason why our framing creation of the discussion topic is more inclusive and better. He says that so we could extend our discussion reach the Epstein and extend the Epstein shortcuts. The Epstein shortcuts not responsible for advocacy because our entire advocacy type framing is a myth of the minor and forcing us to defend traditional debate is harmful for other type of non-traditional teams who have a message that everybody needs here, which is the reason why why our form of debate is more inclusive. The reason why the vote, the jurisdiction arguments makes no sense because you have not done a good job on the economic engagement definition. Immigration policy can still be economic engagement, which means that we have a reasonable interpretation topic. You have also dropped the reasonability argument from the tweets, saying that if it's a debate about performance, it's not necessarily what we're going to be innovation. So we'll still in the scenario building arguments and the only two role playing arguments are BS. The one CP's examining explicit says that the affirmative is always role playing. That leads to a disconnected form of debate where you are forced from your identity and forced to find out the That's the logical white supremacy saying that happens. The seat of political arguments also make no sense because politics is already seated to the right. The framework of the minority was in mishandled according to the mishandled the minority. Now we stand the posting card. This is where it actually messed up. Posting card specifically is in the conscious bank says that performance rate leads to political change because the layers of a youthful someone have lit down only performance types of thing. Actually led to change. This is the only tying your advocacy to your identity is the only way that you become compelled to do it and lead to actual change. The definition are nonsense. They're instead of talking a piece of evidence saying that we are the United States of America. We can have a discussion of the topic, which is the reason why we must change the historical integration. Now we have finally dropped the internal impact to switch out of it. We are the ones who lead to tolerance because we are more inclusive of all types of units and they don't.
509.
Right. It's T then the counterpoint. And the case stuff is like on T. I mean like the cross applications.
So where's the case coming, or?
It's not on the case flow, so I'll just make it clear on the case stuff. Are we good?
No.
Okay. All right. Okay. Our interpretation is that the affirmative must defend that the USFG should substantially increase its economic engagement towards Cuba, Venezuela, and or Mexico. At the top before I do any of the impact work, even if I concede every single argument he makes, we win because they've conceded you should vote negative if they win. If debate norms are bad, then you should break with the most fundamental debate assumption of competition, even if you don't feel confident or very comfortable voting on this argument. It's conceded, which means it must be true as far as the debate round is concerned, which means that even if they win every single argument, you should vote negative. Also, it's much better for spreading the message of their identity politics when they see, because if people hear that Centennial KK lost or lost by winning, it would more effectively be able to spread their message. Now, even if you don't feel comfortable voting for this, you must uphold some rules of debate, even if you're not willing to uphold the entire rest of the framework debate. We are still able to win this debate. Now, our counter-interpretation, and now back to the kind of in the impact debate. This is the only interpretation that allows for both understanding of social location and a predictable basis for mutual consultation. There's not really an answer to the topical version of the affirmative argument where the affirmative could reform immigration policy, which they read a cardinal later on saying that it must be sort of contentions in relation to social issues. They could do that under our interpretation. They would simply have to read their interpretation of social understanding and connect it to a USFG policy, which they read a Somsi advocate for later on. Now, their interpretation can never bring people together with a common understanding for debate. I don't really think there's a substantive answer to most of the impact work at the top of the 2 and T, except for saying that he doesn't articulate an impact to deliberation. So I'll articulate it pretty quickly. First is negative ground. We force people to be asked sometimes and next sometimes, because that's a fair division of affirmative negative ground. They're devolving debate into their interpretation. That means that they can talk about one side of the topic 100% of the time, which means that they have all the time to research that side of the topic, and is unfair to the other team. Our where evidence impacts this and says that you have to be prepared to defend both sides of the topic in order to have a real understanding of the issue and distract from moral tolerance and detract from moral dogmatism, which means we have a net better internally to all of their offense. Even if they win all of their terminal impact claims, you cannot advance your argument in the future without learning these without engaging in this deliberative activity. Second is predictability. There are a bunch of different ways they can approach the ethical wrongs of the resolution today. Let's say there's basically a link of omission to topic, which means that they that are able to talk about one topic 100% of the time, where we don't really have the opportunity to research that and come in with a predictable strategy. Now, there are a couple of impacts to that. First is competitive equity. We need some inroads to answer their argument. They continue the top evidence, which says that there's an intrinsic impact to the fairness. It says that it says an infinitely structure of an agon conceived as a contest that can only rewrite the principle of forms, and you need some sort of competent other to engage in. Without that, you are never able to advance your argument, and contest becomes meaningless. That's also one of the Shively evidence. Now, they've also conceded that even if there is some sort of oppression, some sort of oppressive form against them, that should not be relevant consideration in the debate round. That's there's a distinction between in-round and out-of-round fairness, and you should not bring that into the debate round, especially when he says you don't know my social identity. That's right, and that's why we should not have, and that's why we cannot have some sort of valuable discussion about your social identity or how we should advance USFG about how we should advance the engage the resolution via that interpretation. Now, the Zappin evidence also indicates that you cannot make a truth claim as prerequisite to the value you want to see, because the only way you know what knowledge is good, or even if your knowledge is good, you should still be subject to another interpretation of that in order to so you defeat that. It also makes it easier to defeat and advance new arguments in the future, which means we internally turn all of your offense are yeah. So the first argument is about there's no impact to deliberation. That was answered above. Also, they don't extend a counter-interpretation of what the role of the ballot should be, which means that as long as we win some sort of interpretation of economic engagement, excluding their affirmative, we win the debate. And now the limits of that argument, first, it doesn't apply to the debate game, and then you can extend that even if it does lead to some sort of intellectual policing, debate is still a game under either framework, and time limits, competitive structure proof. It's just a question whether or not we make the game meaningful and constructive. Second is that voting negative doesn't require you throwing debate norms out the window or personal opinions or deeming them worthless. You can still agree with their message, but vote negative because it sets a precedent for bad debate norms, even even if you do agree with their message, and there's no impact to you. They chose to participate before reading this argument through their traditional debate norms, and I saw you read framework at Georgetown. The argument that you threw it out the window is terrible, and it feeds in our past experience argument, which means that if you value past experience, we would never ever be able to change the debate community because we would still be held to the past debate practices, i.e. I would be able to critique you for reading framework at Georgetown. Now, the disclosure solves argument. There's a difference between having 10 minutes before the debate to be able to prep for your affirmative and having some sort of well-researched, thought-out strategy to be able to answer that. I've seen a short argument, and it's about formulation of a common understanding about identity, which means that even if it's not specific to Asian identity, it's still it's still good for deliberation. The counter-determination about immigration, if you see the data evidence takes the entirety of its economic engagement into consideration, means that its economic engagement. Now, the role-playing bad argument and see the political were answered above. It's not about reasonability. It's about what is the constructive debate norms, the counterclaim. I'm not spending much time on this contradiction bad argument because he makes it for a second and then just goes on to describe the pan evidence. It's about describing China as inherently a threat, which we do not do. We say China's sphere of influence in Latin America is good, and the affirmative crowds that out, not that they are a threat. We're saying that their control is good. Second, it's just a product of them being untopical, which means to use a prior question. Third is that the ethical contradictions argument is valid. Debate is from Roger Salt and says that it allows us to formulate the most ethical action. Counter-interpretation 2 puts a finite limit on their offense. It means that we are the most ethical.
Okay. I believe we have 650. Is that correct?
And go get some water.
Absolutely. The answer to hybrid framework, that framework was the most good question.
No, that doesn't matter. If that's true, then practice.
But also say our practice are still just right, because that framework was a big question. It just says role playing is good to solve a question. We never said we have to be topical. That's why it's called block framework. Do you want me to write something? The example of the contradictions? Yes.
the case counting framework. They still do not have a descent to our methodology, a process of conscientization, naming who we are in relation to the world and taking a step to be able to change that world. Now, this process of conscientization is an internal thing that we, as me and Michael, can go through and learn to make real good social change. Our also G. Card said that the only way we are able to become political activists and be able to debate these policy relatives to go through a process of conscientization, learn our epistemology, our social identity, learn where we come from, to be able to get into politics in that form. That way, our IFS is still a prerequisite to any of their policy claims that it's going to turn. They have also conceded that independent impact of the myth of the model minority throughout the entire debate. This is like conceding extinction scenario in a regular policy debate. You cannot just ignore the affirmative myth of the model minority allows perpetuates the psychological violence against Asian Americans because they are perceived as hardworking. They are seen not to need social welfare, not to need educational help because they are too smart for it. They also allows the oppression of other minorities because they are perceived as not as hardworking as the Asian Americans. Continue this violence. We say that we must stop this consequential evidence as the direct answer to framework because silence is not the answer. The alternative is just to silence us, and this is just what's tell us to shut up and not talk about our Asian identity, our Asian oppression. Is something that is important that should be talked about now. The counterplan. This is a conditionality contradiction to me. You cannot just concede a theory argument to an argument. It's a voting issue. That the contradictions is a bad. The neck block conceding the two and got to it with 20 seconds. Don't take the two in our argument because they're entirely new. One contradiction allows one is to accept because they can keep on going back and changing their position not to appear by it. This allows the system to continue that to know our argument. Critical argument to this turns on your which I think in framework argument because we cannot have a deliberation to challenge oppression or to solve for anything when the oppressors keep on shifting their stance and not talk to anybody. They should be voted because they read a counter because they advocate a process of conscientization, but then conscientization can commodify. He tried to say something maybe in brain, but then tried to stop the Chinese economic collapse from coming. He said that we can try and change things and mustn't break them with the Nietzsche critique, but then read the interpretation of resolution as call for change done by the federal government. We say no, this is a bad form of debate that turns on your fairness argument. However, is anything predictable when you are going to contradict yourself, go against yourself, and do anything? This is also just a bad form of debate that you should because then you can never become competent advocate skills. You never learn how to defend and defend your argument of reliability. Put that immediately. Go to framework. First, it's aligned by interpretation. We have a counter-interpretation. Traffic legal concept. We should have a discussion of the topic. This is all for most of the ground and predictable argument because we are still talking about the resolution. However, this is a performance debate and how you do engage in this debate should matter. The predictable first is that they said there's first they said this vote neck bullshit. All of our answers to commodification applies to it. It was explicitly answered in the 1 year. This argument is essentially saying that to stay silent on the question of racism by voting us down and making us martyrs is bad because Quetzal says that silence of racism reifies it. Also reifies the exclusionary debate and present the status quo because negative interpretation debate almost traditional and social while the actors inclusive non-traditional forms of debate. The message you should spread by voting negative traditional and exclusionary forms of debate which does not solve for anything of the affirmative. They should not be rewarded for doing a bad form of debate, which means that this argument does not make sense. Now they say a topical version solves no, it doesn't. The myth of the model minority is still prevalent. When we use a topical version of people point at Centennial, K, and be like, look at those minorities debating in a traditional form. Why can't you other performing people stop speaking out loud your oppression and start doing the same as them? This is a bad thing. I also Jim McCarter answered this because it makes a sequencing clip that we must go through a process of conscientization because we go to African knowledge. Again, he did not do any impact analysis. Ground and predictability are linked to get into bigger portable impacts. Ground is not an impact itself, and yet we may destroy it. So what then? The impact they declare is dogmatism. The biggest form of dogmatism is excluding our ad because you don't have just because you do not have evidence or you're not prepared. Deliberation, we provide solve for dogmatism because we talk about economic gain, we talk about debate. All our past 4 years of policy and traditional debate should solve for the dogmatism argument, which is not an impact itself. Value and suffering impacts it because when we are not multicultural, the debate becomes extinct because we do not listen to anyone others and do not include their opinion. Not predictability, predictable for who Asians is not predictable. You have to see the rest of the solid bravery card. The one rhetorical imperialism is a form of colonization that just reproduces the bad form of education, which our entire 1AC is a impact to the people from their social location. It is not predictable and impossible. He said external versus internal. This is a double turn, which is a topical version. It's true that we should not bring our external identity into it. How can we have a topical version of her? This is just impact versus differential thought, because then we are forced to stay silent and not talk about anything. The counterinterpretation is able to solve for this because you are within a discussion of history and you can do a policy affirmative. However, we do not kill it. All the rounds are able to solve for that, which means that even if debaters today, we make it more meaningful by making it more inclusive. Our post evidence as a terminal impact event and provides real world examples such as the leader of Beautiful Trucker, where we are able to make a political change because we are able to solve for it. Just because we went framework in the back doesn't mean it's a voting issue. Without saying black framework where we're saying just role-playing is good to be able to engage the other people.
I have everything but the 1AC. I don't have the 1AC.
You want the 1AC?
It's here.
No.
Here.
We will get after stop the camera.